My name is Anne Brooks Brauer. I was born on the banks of the Rappahannock River at Chatham, just below Chatham Manor in Stafford County. Yes, I'm the widow of John Thomas Brauer Sr. There is a John Thomas Jr., and then I have two lovely daughters who are teachers in the area. All three of the Brooks children in my family of Clark Brooks, who was the son of Mary England Brooks, who is the main feature of my talk, because they were really old relatives there in the county and some of the first entrepreneurs. Well, we lived in this little New England bungalow there on the Rappahannock River, right below Chatham Manor, and we children were born at home. The first daughter, they don't know what it was. I guess you would call it crib death nowadays. But she was dressed and ready to come home, and when they went back, she was gone. So my father insisted that we had to be born at home, and we were born at home with a doctor and with a nurse that the family had had for years that lived with us. And so I lived there, and I don't remember too much of it, because this was in 1929 I was born, and then a year later my father, because of the Depression, he lost his store in town, he lost his car, he lost his home, he lost everything. And so then we moved into the Brooks home, the old one in Falmouth. Grandfather Brooks and Mary England had 11 children. He was a grand provider. He had big farms. She had money. She inherited from her family, from the Englands. The Englands were in Stafford before the Brookses. Mary Osmond England was born in Stafford, but William Brooks was born in Fauquier. And so they had their big home there. It's now the Prudential Insurance office. It's a big home. I think it's painted gray. And of course they've modified it. I do have a sketch over here of how it looked in the 1930s. It had a huge front porch around the front and around the side, and sat kind of on a little hill that you walked up from the village. So that was the Brooks home there. And then we came back, and so my aunt, who is kind of like Geneva, she was like the head one, the administrator, you know, and because she's the oldest girl. And a grandfather thought he was doing a favor, and he left the property to her, but ensured that if any of the children needed a place to go, they came home. And so, but she was really wonderful about it. And living there in Falmouth, Grandfather Brooks, as I said, had 11 children, and he sent them all to college, the girls and the boys. And they didn't have any girls' schools and all, you know, when they were real little. And he opened up a little private school with a teacher with all those girls to educate. And so Geneva, the one I'm talking about that stayed in the family home, the Brooks family home, was called locally Miss G, or Aunt G. And they all knew her. And what happened with Geneva that I thought was so sweet and sad, she went to Washington. She went to Mary Washington College. They all did. And that was a training school then. And so she had taken sewing and everything. That's what the girls would take. You didn't have typing it all for the girls then. And so she went to Washington and worked in Landsberg's. So in the big house there, I can tell you about it. I don't know the exact age. Some of the professors have said it was a cotton house. I've never heard of that in my life. It is a salt box architecturally, and as I said, it had the porches, you know, around it. It had a big, huge living room with a big fireplace, and then a huge, huge kitchen, and then another cooking kitchen, both of them inside. Of course, they had an outside kitchen thing too, because they would boil hams and cook pigs, everything. That was, you know, it was done right there. This is in the 1930s, and so then upstairs were all the rooms and all. So anyway, after Geneva came home, the father left her as the grande dame, you know, of the place. And the men, the brothers, all had to contribute to her taxes, her lights, everything. And it's wonderful. They felt obligated to do that. They would not miss that money going to their mother. Same way at that time when we were Episcopalians, we had pews in St. George's, and we had to pay. You had to pay your rent on your pew. And so then coming down from that big house, it had one thing that was very different in it. Was over top of the fireplace in the dining room is a little cabinet, and they have retained it. It's like a Pennsylvania Dutch cabinet that opens up, and all the important papers were put in there. And so that was very sweet. And then it was a big house. I think there was 4 or 5 bedrooms upstairs. And in one room upstairs, there was a little short door with a hole in the door. And the men, the masons, and most of the men were masons, would put their head through it and powder their wigs. And so that's still there. They didn't let me go upstairs to see after it was sold. I was heartbroken. One of our cousins' parents got in there, and she just sold it. It had 16 acres running right down into the village. So anyway, when we leave that, you start there on Cambridge Street, you walk down, and the first place you'll come to on your right is the old colonial tax building. That is the original, and it's right there in Falmouth, and it's really a lovely walk. And then you come down to Mr. Berry's store. Now, I'm going back now to the 1930s. Mr. Berry I think he was the treasurer. He always kept an office, and they paid tax money to him. I remember that. And then the Berry store was on the corner. Then when you turn the corner, you would come to a house, and underneath of that, in the basement part, was the local barber shop. The Butchers ran this barber shop there, and they were nice people, and we knew all of them. And then you came down to what we called a double house. And so then the next one, little small house next to us, has been recently, and from the past the 40s, a little church house. And but when I lived in the store, which is the next building, it was a Cox home, and the Coxes lived there, and they had a nice bunch of children. Then you came to the back in the 1800s, it was the England Market, and it was a grocery store. And this was Mary England's property from her side of the family, and her brothers, who lived up on the England farm up off of Road 17, there were 2 brothers up there, old bachelors, and they raised cattle and things, and they would bring their produce down, and then they would sell it in the store. So then after they passed on, they always retained the store. And so after my daddy lost everything at the First Depression, we went there, and we went as a family to live up at the old home. And then when he opened up the store, it had living quarters over the store. So I lived over top of the Falmouth Market. He named it Falmouth Market for years and years. And right next to the Falmouth Market is what I'm leading up to, which I think is the most important, is, you can't see it now, but it's a little bridge and the run. Locally, we just called it the run or the mill race. And each side of that is blocked in with great big stone blocks, exactly like the C&O Canal. And it feeds into that from way up on Truslow Road. Now, I haven't looked up all of it, but I can remember as a child knowing that's where the water came from. And came right on down and went right by our store and crossed under the bridge. It's still there, goes up to that old 17, and then curves around and becoming the mill race, because the mill was there, and then the water goes through the mill and then goes out into the river. And see, the local people would go down there to the mill and they ground the wheat, and you bought it that way.